Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Carroll's Chronicles. I am here with Brian Carroll, the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend. And I am Marquedon Watkins, and I am the host here. And today, I wanted to ask Brian Carroll a couple questions just about some takes that he had on some topics that I've been thinking about this past week. So, first, I wanted to ask you, you're really intrigued with this, aren't you?
Yeah, of course.
So,
we have a very famous podcast together that I'm sure our viewers listen to. So of course I'm interested in what you got on.
So first I want to address how you have a UNC cup in front of us right now.
Yeah.
And everyone that knows Brian Carroll knows that you are a big North Carolina fan. So when we discuss rivalries, when we talk about rivalries, you know, at least for me, as a personal guy, I was a Falcons fan.
Right.
I don't really hate the Saints like a lot of people hate the Saints. Or, you know, I'm sure you as a North Carolina fan, you hate Duke, you despise Duke. So like, what does that look like in your lens as like compared to how rivalries can be discussed?
Yeah, sure. And I don't say that word. It's a four-letter
Okay.
word, and we don't use that word in our household. So that says something about the rivalry. Yeah, but actually growing up so I said Carolina before I said mommy or daddy. I mean, I'm down here. I've been a Tar Heel fan my whole life. This cup is probably not unlike the cup I got the first game I ever went to. And we all remember that first experience entering the palace, the arenas of Div 1 college football for the first time, and all the colors and the lush green and the sounds, the band, the marching band. I was overwhelmed. And so that just fed that passion. But then it was NC State. Let's see, I'll try to recall the cheer, but it ends with "Go to hell, State." Now it's become that school that you mentioned in four letters as a satanic mascot. I'm just saying that's wrong.
Yeah.
So the rivalries change over time. We can't, we take them for granted, but certainly right now, and certainly in college basketball, with Carolina sitting right now ranked number 1, that's the rivalry in basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a thrill to be a part of, and you sort of, our tribal identities are strong. So if you move if you're looking for a home and you see a house for sale next to a house with that school's flag sticking out, no, we're not living here. It's that deep.
And then being at UNC, like you had a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of famous people,
Yeah.
like just to be on campus with a lot of people that played on
Professional.
college, professional teams or college
Sure.
collegiate teams. What moments would you say was like, at least for you as a journalist or getting into journalism at the time, what moments would you say was like profound for you? That was just like, wow, like
Sure.
when you
Well,
look
they
back.
weren't profound for me as a journalist. They were profound for me as a Carolina fan and then a Carolina student. So my wife and I met her at Carolina, and we went the same years. And so Michael Jordan was a junior our freshman year. So we would see him all over campus and everywhere we went. And that was cool. And then we'd have players in our classes. I remember sitting next to, his name was Warren Martin. He was 7 feet 3 inches-ish. So I'm sitting, I always sat in the front row, teacher's pet. And so I'm on the front row, and then next to me is Warren Martin, and his kneecap is right here. And if I turn my head, that's where his knees were, because 7'3", fold himself into this desk. So it was a thrill to just see our guys all over campus. I remember Michael walking across the quad one afternoon, waving and saying hello, and he was always very gregarious in returning greetings like that. But the other experience I remember, Harris Barton, all-pro. I think he was a right guard for the 49ers for his entire career, really good player. I took a religion class with him, and my religion professor would start every class by throwing him a tennis ball. He would use a tennis ball to start discussion. And so Harris would catch the tennis ball, and then my professor would say, "Number 24, Vice President." And Harris Barton would give the 24th Vice President in U.S. history. "Number 19, President." And he'd know the 19th President. It was very impressive.
Nice. Okay, so transitioning a little bit, we talked about kind of like profound moments and stuff like that when you talk about journalism or somewhat profound moments. Going through the profession that you go through, I figured that you would get a lot of advice, or even in life, you just get a lot of advice from people from a lot of different levels of, experience. So my question was, what is the best advice you feel like you've ever received?
That's really easy. So this same professor that I just mentioned, Dr. Peter Ivor Kaufman, he's published several books of repute. He was my favorite professor in college. And I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I had no idea. And I asked if he would mind just spending a little time with me to help me talk this through. And he said, absolutely. So we walked the campus, I'll never forget. The main part of campus, which is beautiful if you ever get to visit Chapel Hill. And he didn't say anything. He'd only ask questions. The first thing he asked me was, what are you majoring now? I said, business administration. He said, do you enjoy it? I went, absolutely not. I hate it. Well, then he said, let me ask you another question. How much money would it take for you to be okay with doing that for most of your waking hours the rest of your life? Oh, gosh, I couldn't come up with anything. He said, well, where do you find your passion? He didn't use these words. These are very 2022 words. But, as I remember it, what is your passion? What is your bliss? When are you most alive? When does time disappear? And I said, when I write. And he said, how much money would it take for you to write and be happy with that for most of your waking hours for most of the rest of your life? Not very much. And so this conversation went on for about an hour, and he was just very generous in that way. And then he got into his little MG convertible and sped off in his tweed blazer. I'm just a quintessential professor. So sneaking into knowing it in that conversation were, I want to be a professor someday, right? Because then you get to marry writing with educating, or at least that's wrong. I don't educate. Hopefully I create circumstances in which people can educate themselves, can own their education. So that's the best. I've not been able to replicate that, which says something about his brilliance, because to just ask questions and to end up advising in a way that now 35 years later I remember it, that's impressive.
And then a follow-up question is one that I think I was asked, and it's kind of hard to find an answer to, but, well, not really that hard, but what's the worst advice you've ever received?
I think the worst advice was probably, because it was very fashionable when we became parents. So I have 3 kids whom I love more than anything, and look forward to spending time with them next week, all of them. And so when we first started having kids, fashionable advice was, it's not the quality of time, it's not the quantity of time, it's the quality. That's just stupid, okay? There's no divorcing quality from quantity, because you can't choreograph the quality. The quality happens in the midst of quantity. So that's the worst advice. I didn't follow it, fortunately, neither did my wife. We've always believed in quantity of time with all of our kids. In fact, this might not be one of your questions, but I'll just anticipate it, and that's, what's the best compliment you've ever received? The best compliment I have ever received. I'm an assistant professor here at Berry. My kids are playing on our swing set that I lost a body part putting together. That's a different story. I'm sitting there grading, and my oldest, she's probably around 12 at the time. She runs over and she says, Dad! That sounds younger than 12, so she must have been younger than 12. Anyway, Dad! I went, what, honey? I put my grading down, and I look up at her, and she said, Dad, you always have time for us. And then she skipped away. And I remember just coming undone in that moment, because that's what you want your kids to know. So I think I've answered too many questions.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. It's about time to wrap it up for us. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. If you have any questions you want to ask Brian Carroll, please email me or email him yourself. So I hope you have a good rest of your evening.